talk's a little odd because it's like a talk about a talk. I'm teaching at a very adorably named conference next month. It's called I'll just hold it. It's called Computer Assisted Reporting. And it has, oh my God, hi Libby. Hi, sorry. It has an adorable name because a bunch of journalists like 30 years ago thought, hey, this computer thing seems like it's going to be a big deal, and they were extremely correct. I first signed up to teach web scraping, and then because that's not enough, I asked to give a talk on how the internet works, and if that's not enough, I pitched giving a talk on talking about how the internet works. So here we go. Part of the reason I'm doing this is I'm not a network engineer by trade. I was really spoiled when I was working in software because it was a relatively mature company, so I was a data engineer, and Docker was already set up for me, and I got to do my little poking around in Redshift, and it was really fun and cool. But when I moved over to the Oregonian, what they don't tell you is that if you are coding, you are a de facto full stack, whatever the heck you can make yourself do every day. So that's what I've been learning about the internet as a consequence. I have this Feynman quote up here because a while back I also had to learn a bit of electromagnetism for some research, and took a lot of solace in his work, in part because he's a good explainer and in part because he clearly relishes pedagogy. And I couldn't find the exact quote, but at some point he basically described lying to people for the first few years that he taught physics, because you need a good enough model to bootstrap your way into the harder stuff. So I'm going to lie to you for a little bit. And the next principle that guided this talk was an observation a buddy of mine made about what defines a good talk for him, and it is describing a particular problem and how you solved it. So the way I wanted to approach teaching how the internet works is to abstract out principles that underlie difficulties in communication technologies broadly, and convey how those have historically been, if not fixed, then addressed by previous technologies. So there are, of course, a few models you could use to talk about the internet, and I chose this particular model because it's fairly common, it's simple, and tonight I'm not actually going to talk about how I described the application layer because, well, for one, I didn't have a good metaphor. Feel free to hit me up if you have one. And yeah, I wanted to focus on the internet. Before we even get to clients and servers. So I used these symbols as a cue in a given slide for what part of that stack I'm talking about, because it can be a little unclear. I mean, we start with a link layer, and that is just, before you even deal with a network, there is you trying to get a thing, in this case a message, or, well, in this case a message, or a donut, very far away. I really liked that people called this out. It was something that bothered me in the show as well. And it just, out of curiosity, I wondered how long it would take to get a message to across the country to Brooklyn. It would take 25 days. Yeah, Raven can only travel 100 miles a day, and that's pushing it. So anyway. So better than using a physical substrate, you want to use telegraphy. So when I first started learning about this, I thought this was referring to electrical telegraphy, but telegraphy is beautiful. It's one of those terms that just means conveying information across a distance, specifically textual or symbolic information, not say straight up audio, without any kind of physical exchange. And it turns out we've been doing that for a really long time. The earliest examples might be lighting signal fires, and we've all seen probably cool as hell movies that use that. But one of my favorite technologies to learn about was this 18th century tool. This is like the original semaphore. Flag semaphore, that might be more familiar, actually evolved after this. But this fellow, whose name I can't remember, Shep, but I don't remember the rest of his name, devised, well, many iterations, but this is one iteration of conveying symbols through these arms. And this is essentially communicating, I mean, limited by the speed at which people can move the arms, but this is through vision. You're conveying information at the speed of light. Like, it just takes somebody being able to see the next poor schmuck down the line 5 to 20 miles away. I don't remember how when I calculated it, extrapolating from the system they had reliably in France, information could go about 780 miles an hour, which is pretty good. I greatly enjoyed making these. They were slightly offset, so it was more adorable, but it was just a means of conveying, like, it's very cool to go 780 miles an hour, roughly, but it's non-trivial to send a message of any meaningful length. Send donuts is at once a reasonably sized message and one of the most important messages you could convey. So better than Semaphore, we have electrical telegraphy. And I feel like this is where I first started getting excited about integrating, like, the history of telecommunication or communications technology and discussion of the internet, because this is the first undersea cable. I don't have time for it tonight, but my favorite part about describing the internet was wowing people with how the internet really is a series of tubes, and showing them these fiber optic cables that convey that information, because they're really beautiful, and also nommed on by sharks. I learned, I mean, I knew cats did this, and so now I think of sharks as the cats of the sea. It's like they're inexplicably just chewing on these cables. Like, there are literally plenty of fish in the sea, and you are compelled to chew through cable. That's amazing. So yeah, purportedly near instantaneous, even across the United States. And this is a map. I don't know that all of these were actually realized. This is a map depicting both existing telegraphy lines and planned telegraphy lines. And it's really beautiful to see, but among the things that really sticks out to me is that this isn't a good model for the internet, because you have all of these, like, terminal nodes, like these poor kind of schmucks out past Tuscaloosa, like, good luck. So when you want to convey information, not just to, like, one person over yonder, you have a potential problem. Well, even just trying to convey something down the line at all. Poor Tuscaloosa. I mean, one tower goes down and they're not getting donuts. This is where I started really going off the rails and enjoying my journey into Pusheen GIF land. So we have the problem of, what do you happen when a node in your line is knocked out, and how do we deal with access? Like, many more people than just the people fortunate enough to live along those lines deserve information. So now we have, I don't actually wind up going into, in this talk, the history of telephones, but I'm super stoked to talk about them sometime, and the great tragedy that is internet infrastructure relying on cable instead of phones, when phones are utility, and Comcast got into our lives through cable, and now they call themselves an entertainment company, not a utility, to get around their obligation of providing information to people without concern for profit. Anyway, this is an internet. That's a lot of copper, that's a lot of money. So yeah, we start seeing kind of an integration that looks more like internet. So now, the way I describe, I'm not going into it tonight, but I was able to talk about how cool it is that routers, so every node along our network, have these little, like, lookup tables, and they keep up with their neighbors, and they're like, hey neighbor, are you up today? Can you handle messages? And they update it when something goes wrong. So if A is knocked out, then our little node's lookup table says, aha, now my path is B. A is not among my viable neighbors anymore. So how do we convey that information between nodes? One's knocked out, I just kind of glossed over it by saying, well, now we know to go to a different node, but how is that actually handled? And that's when I go into the transport layer. I had the luxury of going into packets and greater detail about like those packets' headers, but among the ways that I tried to describe this, and this is hilarious because who here has even used a fax machine? Sweet. Okay. I wasn't sure about the demographics tonight. I've sent maybe a couple of, isn't that so cute? There's like a lone pixel. Oh, little buddy. I don't remember what I was doing with that, but it's adorable. Anyway, I likened it to faxes because you have not just the to and from information, which is part of the internet protocol, but TCP allows you to specify a port. And I likened that to saying, like, there is an address you can send it to, but maybe DonutJS is one of 5 entities there, and you wanted to. I likened it to. I likened ports to, say, a phone extension. There is an entity at this address specifically you want to address, and further, there is other information in that header that tells you what to expect. So we have our little pages coming in. You know, and so in my fax, am I really requesting nuts? I love nuts. Almonds are pretty good. But you compare almonds to glazed donuts, and it doesn't work. So we notice there's a mismatch. We have our Detective Pusheen on the case, which happens literally every time you send packets over a network. And then it's filled in for us. And then another cute way I really wanted to convey this information was... this is adapted from a joke that I thought was really good. I love this little guy. I even like role played with somebody in the class. I likened it to when you want to convey to somebody that you want the salt and you say, could you please pass the salt? I do hear, like, there is a type of person that says, like, why would you say that when you could just say, pass the salt? And I say, well, like, that's actually, there's metadata in the, could you please pass the salt? There is, like, the pure text, like, I guess the inquiry, and then there's the subtext of, like, I respect your time. I am going through an especially elaborate protocol to convey to you the respect for your time and your potential unwillingness to pass salt to me or anyone. And then, additionally, a joke that I thought was extremely good. It was actually really hard to find the original joke. A lot of things popped up around like summer 2014. This might be the original, but anyway, yeah. So failing a clear analogy to previous technologies, I told jokes. And here are some of the resources I used in my learn-ins. Like I said, I'm kind of a fake engineer. I think I've tried to set up a NAT gateway, and I refuse to rent a router or modem from Comcast. Hit me up if you want to learn more. But aside from that, I taught myself these things through these fine books. Thanks.